Joining me now is Brandy Vaughn. She is the founder of the Council for Vaccine Safety. She was also a former pharmaceutical sales rep for Merck and is now a very outspoken opponent of mandatory vaccinations. So welcome. It's great to have you in studio. So talk to me a little bit. What compelled you to found the Council for Vaccine Safety?
Well, I'm a former Merck rep, as you said, and I sold Vioxx for Merck. And through that experience, I really saw how corrupt the whole system is. And it ended up being one of the largest corporate payouts in the United States and one of the largest drug recalls, $6 billion in fines. And through that and what kind of went down behind the scenes and what I learned from that, I really realized that the agencies that are meant to protect us from the industry and regulate the drugs and things like that are really, they aren't doing that in reality.
They're protecting
they're actually almost a puppet for the pharmaceutical industry at the moment. And my eyes were really open. So I left Merck and I went to Europe and I came back with my son. I was 6 months old, vax-free. In Europe, they have a whole different mindset on the pharmaceutical industry and vaccines and all of that. And I was told at a doctor's office that my son really needed these, I think it was 16 vaccines to catch him up on schedule and all of this. And I questioned it. I said, I want to look at inserts. You know, I don't trust the healthcare industry. I don't trust doctors after spending so much time in their offices. Mm-hmm. So I really wanted more information. So he didn't like that answer. The appointment was over. I left. I did years of research. Now my son is 4.5 years old. And I got into this fight because of SB 277, which was ground zero in California for the mandatory vaccine laws that we're going to see sweeping through the country, pushed by the pharmaceutical industry.
Right.
Merck in particular, because they have an almost monopoly on the childhood vaccine schedule.
Wow.
So 6 months ago, that came down in California where I live with my son, and my son would be in the first kindergarten class affected by it. It mandates 35 vaccines before children are allowed into the school system, daycare, if that's where they enter, a preschool. And so I started speaking out, and I realized that I'm going to have to start to share all of what I have learned and all of what I saw behind the scenes, because things are going drastically wrong.
Right. And very quickly.
Very quickly. And so one of the things I feel like I always have to point out to people is that in the 1980s, the schedule was far, far different than what there is now. And now, 2016, it's going to be 53 recommended vaccines on the CDC schedule for children under six and under. And that is far more excessive than it was in the 80s, and it's more than any other developed country in the world.
Right.
And our children are suffering from it. What we have right now is the first generation of children that's sicker than their parents.
Right. That's when we were record sick, obese.
Yeah. And so right now we're giving 53, more than any other country. We're giving vaccines in utero, which are, vaccines are not studied for toxicity and birth defects. There's a reason for it, because in lab studies in animals, they showed they do cause birth defects when you give vaccines to pregnant women. And we're giving 6 to 9 doses. So it begins on the first day of life with the vitamin K shot, with Hep B, and then we're giving 6 to 9 doses, sometimes more, in each child well visit. This is nothing any other country does. And to show for it, we have, the highest infant mortality rate in the developed world.
Right.
And the U.S. Is far above other countries that give far less vaccines. And we spend more on health care per capita than any country in the world. So it's not that. And we have Mississippi, which is the highest rate of vaccination in the states, of all states, and it has the highest infant mortality rate. So a lot of people say, correlation, not causation. But the government that could do these causation studies, they're not doing it because they're hand in hand with the pharmaceutical industry. So what we have to go on is the fact that our children are now sicker than the generation before. Right. And this is not happening in other countries. And it's never happened in for generations in the U.S. And we're seeing epic numbers of, neurological delays, ADHD, speech delays, autism, type 1 diabetes, childhood leukemia, autoimmune issues, epilepsy, asthma, food allergies, psoriasis, eczema, lupus. I mean, the list goes on and on. And so our children are really suffering.
Right. And you mentioned the vitamin K, which I think is sort of a new thing, that all of a sudden now this is something that children on their first day of birth, when they're born, they need to have this now. All of a sudden, your son wasn't given it there in Holland. They didn't even know about it. So you hadn't even done a lot of research into why this is being given. But it was interesting here because Rob Dew, our producer, he just had his fourth child, a little girl. And so they wanted to give this vitamin K. And he said, well, talk to me about it. I want to read the inserts. And what they were saying was it's just, it's 100% vitamin K. It's completely fine, safe and effective. It's that same talking point, safe and effective. And you actually brought some pretty interesting news to us. So go ahead and talk to us about what was actually going on with this vitamin K.
Right. Well, luckily it was kind of a random, although I think nothing is random in the world, conversation with Rob. And I had a nurse send me just last week a photo of the box of the vitamin K injection that they give. And then also a different company, she sent a picture of the vial. And this is things that we would never see when we actually go into the doctor's office. Right. They don't tell us in the hospital.
It's just natural. It's vitamin K.
Right. Well, on the box, on one of them, because there are two different companies that make it, well, three, but anyway, this was two of them. The main active ingredient is polysorbate 80, and there are strong links to infertility, to autoimmune issues. Polysorbate 80 is banned in a lot of countries, especially in injectables. And that's the main active ingredient in one of the vitamin K solutions. Mm-hmm. In the other one, on the vial, it says contains no more than 100 micrograms per liter of aluminum. And you combine that with the Hep B shot, which is 250 micrograms per liter of aluminum. On day one, our children are getting 350 grams, and if not more. And this is just unheard of. It blows my mind because aluminum has no place in our body. It's a known neurotoxin. It's a heavy metal. It's incredibly difficult to detox from. And we're injecting these into the bloodstream. So it goes straight to the vital organs. It's not like when you ingest something and 60% of it is filtered out through the kidney and the natural detox process. Wow. It goes straight to vital organs. And this is happening on day one. So it's not surprising that the U.S. leads the developed world in infant mortality rates and day one mortality rates. And we seem to think that we have, the best healthcare protocol in the world. And you're not seeing these type of things in other countries. And people need to start questioning this, because what I've really learned doing my research is this is all about profit. It's not about our health. I mean, how can we believe that it's about our health when we have the sickest children? We have the sickest generation of children in our country at the moment. Right. Things like peanut allergies. Peanuts are no longer allowed in schools. All the food allergies, the gut issues, the autoimmune diseases, all of these things that I mentioned. I mean, that is the true epidemic in our country, are those diseases and that childhood level of poor health that we have. Right.
And the cognitive dissonance of the American people to just continue on and say, well, the doctor says it's safe and effective. I've got to go ahead and, just do what the doctor says. And you pointed out as well how there isn't really any testing. And so in these other countries, they don't have the big pharma weighing down on the doctors, whereas we do here.
Right. And I think that that's a really important point, is that as a pharmaceutical sales rep, we heard all about the gold standard level of safety testing that goes into pharma drugs, right? Long-term, double-blind, placebo-based studies. And because vaccines are not classified as a pharmaceutical drug, even though they clearly are, and they're actually more dangerous because you're injecting them versus ingestion, they don't go under this. They don't undergo the same level of safety testing as normal pharmaceutical drugs.
Wow!
And so there are no long-term studies. There are no studies where they're studied in combination with other vaccines, and we're giving babies 6 to 9, sometimes more doses of vaccines per baby visit, which is unheard of in any other country. And they don't have real placebo-based controls, which is so very important, because what you're seeing, and one of the things I'm going to go into later in the segment, is like, say, the Gardasil vaccine. Their placebo-based safety study, only 300 were actually on a saline-based placebo out of 18,000 in the study. And what most of the control group was given was a straight aluminum shot. That is the most toxic adjuvant in Gardasil.
They're telling us this is all for our health, that this is the big push of the mandatory vaccinations. What's really going on behind the scenes?
Right. I think it's interesting because what you're hearing is that vaccines aren't profitable. This is about public health. There are going to be huge outbreaks of infectious disease if we don't have more and more and more and more vaccinations. And we're not seeing this in the rest of the developed world, which has a much lower vaccine schedule than we do. So what did happen? Well, I'm going to tell you, vaccines became profitable. With the 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Act, vaccine makers lost all liability. So in the U.S., one way we can push back against corporations running the government and running our lives is we can sue if we're injured or, heaven forbid, we die from something, a product. And during that judicial process, which is in our Constitution for a reason, it goes through a discovery process and a lot of information about the real safety testing that was done and things like that. That's where that information comes out. And when the federal government gave vaccine makers complete liability protection in 1986 and then again in 2011, vaccines became profitable because all of a sudden you're looking at a pharmaceutical drug market, which is completely saturated. There's competition in every disease category. They have to spend a lot on marketing to win out over the competition. You have much more rigorous safety testing for pharmaceutical drugs that you don't have with vaccines because they're classified differently. So you have smaller subsets of study population, and they're not long-term studies. They can be fast-tracked to market. Vaccines are regularly fast-tracked to market through the FDA. And you have no liability. So all of these things that, kind of keep pharmaceuticals in check in the pharmaceutical drug market, which still is not very good because we saw Vioxx, get pulled from the market, killed many people. Merck knew about it before they even took it off the market. But still, there are some hurdles and there's some regulation still a little bit there. But with vaccines, you have hardly any regulation.
Right.
And so they become very much more profitable. In fact, the revenue off of vaccines is much higher than regular pharmaceutical drugs. So what else we're looking at is that there's a huge market for vaccines. We have a lot of disease states that they're now looking to profit off of with vaccines.
Right.
So there's almost 300 vaccines under development right now. And we're seeing a lot for adult issues as well. Yeah. So we have a complete untapped adult market as well. CDC says that 85 to 90% of adults are not up to date on their boosters.
Right.
So technically we're unvaccinated and we're not seeing these huge epidemic outbreaks that they say we would. But what a great market for the pharmaceutical companies. So now they're switching gears and looking to step up mandatory vaccination because they know that people, especially adults, are not going to go out and get their shots, just based off marketing. They need a little more impetus. So they're doing mandatory vaccines. And like I said, there's some scary stuff coming up on the market in terms of vaccines, like ones for HIV, for anthrax, cancer, things that I don't want in my body, dead or alive. I don't want that virus in my body at all, especially with the adjuvants and the neurotoxins and the carcinogens that are actually additives to the vaccine shots as well. So one thing, as they move into to vaccines and look for growth in profit growth through there and shareholder profits, you can see that they're really stepping up the campaign for vaccinations. And one of the main ones driving this is the HPV vaccine. So Merck had Vioxx that was pulled off the market, right? So in the industry, we call the HPV vaccine the have to pay for Vioxx vaccine. Wow. Because the one that has the majority of the market is gardasil, and it's made by Merck.
And they got it now, boys and girls can.
And so Merck made gardasil $135 a dose. And there's 3 doses within 6 months for boys and girls, all ages 9 to 26.
Right.
And so this is far more expensive than any other childhood vaccine. So they're really making a huge amount of profit off of gardasil. And it's coming at the expense of our kids because the aluminum content in gardasil is one of the highest. And you're giving 3 doses back to back within 6 months. So we're seeing huge injuries and deaths with the gardasil vaccine. In fact, a lot of countries in the world are taking it off the market. Japan is actively not recommending it after a government investigation into injuries and deaths. And in the Philippines as well, they're investigating it. The EU just announced a new investigation into the HPV vaccine into gardasil after a great documentary came out of Denmark that really exposed what was going on there. And one of the great quotes off that documentary is from one of the doctors that actually led the Gardasil trials in Denmark for Merck. And it's actually, you can find it in the insert, you reference to Denmark trials. And it's a Dr. Jesper Melson. And he says he ran the investigations into the vaccine when the government ordered those. And he says a realistic estimate is that 1 in 500 girls vaccinated experiences serious side effects. And we're talking life-changing side effects. We're talking women in wheelchairs. We're talking death. We're talking paralysis. We're talking muscle pain that never goes away.
Right.
And Rob Dew, when I just did the radio interview, he mentioned there's a video on YouTube of girls after a school campaign for the HPV vaccine,
right.
and they're just writhing in pain.
Right.
And if you see this kind of injuries, and people are, and they actually protested in the streets. This is not okay. You did not tell us what's in this vaccine. You did not tell us the risk of injury here.
Right.
And we're not being given the information that we need to make a real choice.
One in 500 girls, I mean, that's like the size of a small school. So one person in the school, and they're forcing this on everyone. So
right.
one person in your school, one girl could be wheelchair bound for life, or could
right.
go into premenopause, never be able to have children of her own,
right.
because of an HPV shot, which there's so many different strains of it. And we've done studies on this. It actually can increase your chances of getting other forms of HPV, other strains of it. And I mean, it's your body, as long as you are healthy, can usually clear it.
Right. 90% of cases of HPV clear up completely on their own without any repercussions, and other ones are, the majority are treatable.
Wow.
So in doing more research into HPV, what I realized is, so the World Health Organization says your risk of getting cervical cancer is 1 in 40,000, which already is very, very small, and very small compared to 1 in 500, serious reactions. And yet what they don't tell you is 88% of all cervical cancer cases are in third world countries. So only 12% of all of those cases are in developed world, not even just in the US, in the entire developed world. And so, in terms of like risk of getting cancer, cervical cancer for women in the US, because it can be, mostly prevented through the Pap smear protocol that we have.
Right.
It's very, 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 very minuscule. And in fact, cervical cancer is not even in the top 10 for cancer for women. And the biggest kicker of the HPV vaccine is that 75% of cases of cervical cancer are in women over 55. But the vaccine only lasts 8 to 10 years. So think of how much money they're going to make off boosters, right? But why are we mandating this for teenagers when that vaccine is not going to give them coverage for the real risk category, which is not even a real risk because it's so small, the risk of getting cervical cancer. But we're giving this vaccine to teenagers, and it only lasts until maybe they're 30, being generous.
Right.
And yet they're not going to be at risk for it until they're over 55, really. So why are we giving this to teenagers? We're seeing an amazing amount of injuries and deaths, and the risks are not worth the benefits.
Wow.
And in fact, one of the lead researchers, Dr. Diane Harper, who was an independent consultant for Merck on the Gardasil trials, is speaking out against these HPV vaccine mandates because of this. The risk, the benefits are just not there. I mean, but the profit is. And in fact, one of the things I definitely want to touch on is that this is worth tens of billions of dollars for Merck. There are 76 million kids in the U.S. in the last census numbers between 9 and 26, boys and girls. And this is worth tens of billions with an annual recurring revenue stream of $1.8 billion. This is like blockbuster
We've got to get this information out there.
Blockbuster status. So there's been a lot of propaganda with the pharmaceutical companies out there right now. So my nonprofit is launching a public education campaign to counter all this misinformation, to get the truth out there, to get vaccine ingredients, what people need to know that they're not being told. So please go donate at my website, www. Council for Vaccine Safety. We're going to really change the world together.
And it's that type of behavior behavior that spurred me to do the research to develop a true nutraceutical formula that was designed to smooth out and help children focus. All of our children are hit with modern mind control. Television, music, fast food, GMOs, sugars, you name it. Young humans have not yet developed their nervous system and are being hammered daily by globalist concoctions. It's no wonder they can't focus and calm down and then are put on dangerous psychotropic drugs. Working with my team, we set out to find the best formula with the highest quality ingredients that children would actually like and take. We worked with the leading manufacturer in nutritional supplements that are safe for children to bring you the most affordable and powerful calming formula out there. Introducing Child Ease with herbs and calming extracts like chamomile and lemon balm and essential nutrients that taste great. Obtain your Child Ease today at InfoWarsLife.com. That's Child Ease exclusively at InfoWarsLife.com.